Welcome to the LeaderCast podcast, a weekly deep dive into the stories that transformed our guests into leaders worth following. I'm your host, Joe Boyd. If you've been enjoying the podcast, thank you so much for being a listener. One simple thing you can do to help us out is give a review wherever you listen. Today's guest is Tyler Merritt. He is the founder of the Tyler Merritt Project and a best-selling author. I'm going to be honest with you, this conversation went off the rails pretty much immediately, and don't tell the other guests, it might be my favorite one ever. Tyler Merritt, welcome to LeaderCast podcast. I'm super excited to get to know you and to talk to you today.
Joe, we are going to have a good time, man. So I don't know what your listeners thought they were going to get, but whatever they thought they were going to get, we're going to find a way to surprise them in a way where somewhere in the middle of this are going to be like, I was not expecting that amount of greatness.
Let's do it. Hey, so I'm sure you get this all the time. Like, your name started to pop up in my virtual world a couple years ago, and then got on your website and read some of your stuff, and then I remembered suddenly, oh, that's the guy from that video from, because you had a viral video like in 18 or 19 or something like that, right? So then I don't know if that happens to you a lot, but I finally put together, oh, that was Tyler back then. So can we just start with that? So because some folks know you, some folks don't. So tell us a little bit about, where you are today and maybe how you kind of gathered an audience through that.
The thing about it is I'm kind of all over the map. Yeah. So some people will go back even deeper than that. Yeah. And then people will go back even deeper than that. So one of the things that probably spread the most kind of all throughout the world before You Call the Cops went viral in 2018 is I was a part of a curriculum called the Gospel Project for Kids, which went all over the world. And so when I originally kind of took the job as an actor who happened to be a Christian and did an episode of it, and they kind of talked me into it for like a low amount of money to do it, it didn't occur to me things like perpetuity and that this stuff would be out in the world for forever.
Right.
And it started to become one of the biggest curriculums that was a part of the Lifeway work. And so unbeknownst to me, I ended up being basically like kids' Sunday school teachers all over the world, because I'd be on camera reading from a teleprompter, telling these stories, but it got made into like Korean and Cantonese, like it was just all over the place. So there was that before You Call the Cops. But before that, I was in a band that I started in Northern California that brought me into Nashville. So there are people who knew me from doing music before they knew me before Gospel Project. And then before You Call the Cops happened, and that blew up in a way that no one could have possibly imagined. If you're listening and you're like, wait, what video are they talking about? If you were on the internet from 2018 to 2022 and you did not see my video before You Call the Cops, you did not internet correctly, because it really was everywhere, to the point, Joe, where I would wake up in the morning and have messages from like all over the world asking me questions like, what's a roll tide? Yeah. And when you have a video that's been seen over 100 million times, it just means people are just always watching it.
Yeah.
It's always being showed somewhere at some period of time. So I released Before You Call the Cops, which is basically a video about me talking directly to camera, telling the listener just about myself. Very subtle facts just about who I am, that I think bananas are disgusting, which they are. That I like the music. I can tell you every lyric to the musical Oklahoma, but every lyric to the NWA Shout Out Compton album, that I like hockey and basketball. Just a lot of things that people would not necessarily assume would be in my wheelhouse. And the idea was to break the idea of assumption.
Yeah.
And when I made the video, to be honest with you, man, it was just an idea that I had, that I wanted to kind of get out a little bit of frustration. Mm-hmm. And my mom to this day says, Tyler, because I took my shirt off. I was trying to give an idea of just being transparent. Yeah. So in the video, I'm shirtless, my dreads are down. And, you know, to this day, my mom says to me, why didn't you wear a shirt? And I'm like, Mom, if I knew 100 million people were going to see this video, I would have put a shirt on. So it's fun, man, because
it's technically
now
a viral.
that
it's a viral topless video. Technically, is what you're telling me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I essentially put out a topless viral video. So now, with that being said, bro, the more people discover me, they're able to kind of track back maybe where they first came upon who I was.
Now, I told you right before we started in our 2-minute pre-meeting that we have so much weird stuff in common. I'm going to try to just not make this all insular and like just about the two of us becoming buddies. But my life's sort of similar. I went to Bible college and became a pastor and started church. Was a mega church pastor, teaching pastor. There's definitely folks that know me from that era. And then I took the weirdest U-turn ever and started training, doing improv with the Second City. And I was in a Vegas.
I saw, man.
So I went from being a pastor to working at the Rio Casino like overnight, and did comedy for 3 years, and then did acting, and then started businesses. And so I'm always trying to gauge, like, does this person know me, and for which era, and do I tell them I'm not exactly like I was back then? You know what I mean? It's an interesting thing, because and then you feel most people in the world, of course, don't recognize either one of us, probably, really, when you walk through the store or something. So it's just a weird kind of way to go through the world and try to figure out, who does this person think I am right now?
Well, I'll tell you, because I'm kind of unmistakable. Like, I'm a big black dude with dreadlocks, right, who usually wears a bandana.
Yeah.
I get noticed way more than I probably should.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's always a little bit weird, because I now I'm probably more known than I ever have been for a number of reasons. Because my book has become really popular and a lot of other things. But with that being said, it's always weird, because you see people looking at you, and or they'll have their phone out, and you are always like, I can see you, right? Like, I can see you looking my way. But there used to be a really weird time where I would be in Target, and some lady or guy would come up to me and be like, "Hey, are you Tyler Merritt?" And I would have to think to myself, how long has this guy been, like, following me?
Yeah.
And the reason why I say that is because I'm going, was I cussing? Did I tell an inappropriate story? Like, does he know me from Gospel Project?
Yeah.
Does he know me from my band? Does he know me from acting? What does this guy know me from? And am I about to be in trouble for anything I said over the past 3 minutes? Which is a weird place to be, man, when you're evolving as people in your life. And sometimes people don't give you the permission to do that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, sometimes I tell people, look, I like parts of me when I was in my 20s better too. Like, but I am now. I just turned 50. You haven't known me for 20 years. This is anyway. The other thing we have in common, and I want to jump into all sorts of stuff, but I graduated college, moved straight to Las Vegas, and moved there with several of my friends. We got married at 21 and moved there with my wife, and several of my friends moved there with me, and my best friend's still back there. I'm an only child, and he's my brother, whether he likes it or not. So he's and I have 2 kids. I call them my God kids. They never told me I could do that, but I do. And they are both Las Vegas Academy students. Katie graduated. She's graduating college this year, and then my godson Drew is going to be a senior at LVA next year. And I know
man.
That's where you went to high school, like you're the first class or something like that, right? Is that true?
Yeah. 94. I was the first graduating class.
So it's still going. And
yeah, I did well. It was my I did it. I did that.
But lots of in your video, you actually say it's interesting, because I rewatched it yesterday, that you're like, I'm from Las Vegas, or grew up in Las Vegas, and that city still holds my heart. I say stuff like that all the time. People think I'm nuts, because people either think of Vegas for Vegas, right? It's like a party place. But a lot of people tell me I could never live there. It's awful. How could you do that? But I love that city. It still feels like Cincinnati and Vegas are my 2 hometowns, and I get kind of mad when people don't like Vegas.
I think Vegas is one of the most misunderstood cities in the world. And this is coming from somebody who grew up there.
Yeah.
Like, it didn't occur to me that Las Vegas was Las Vegas until I went to college and saw Real World Las Vegas
Yeah.
on MTV and went, oh snap, that's where I grew up. like I didn't understand why people thought Las Vegas was such a big deal until I was able to step away from it. And I realized, man, kids that grew up in Las Vegas, similar to, I feel like, kids that grew up in New York City or Brooklyn,
Yeah.
or people that have lived an extended amount of time in Las Vegas, we're just built different, man. We dream different.
Yeah.
There's just a different amount of drive to us. There's just there's kind of no borders on who we think we can be, right or wrong.
Yeah.
And that's something that Las Vegas kind of does to you, because my first job was at Circus. You know what I mean? Like, that was my first job.
Were you working the carnival rides? Is it?
I was working the little stand, throw a dart and try to blow up the balloons. They put you on a little different thing every time. So let me ask you, and I know your listeners, some people know this, some people don't. Okay, so where did you pastor?
I was at a church called Canyon Ridge Christian Church that was started by Central Christian Church. I got there as an intern in year 2. So that was
on Jones Road.
It's Lone Mountain, Jonesville Mountain. That's where the building ended up being. Yeah. And
my parents live walking distance from that church, and we're there 2 weekends ago.
Oh, well, that's awesome. So how I got there is I grew up in Columbus, Ohio. My youth pastor his name's Kevin Oder, and he went out there to start that church in his mid-30s probably, and I had just graduated from Bible college, so he invited me out to be an intern. And then Mike Bro, the founding senior pastor, about 3 years in, left and went back to Kentucky. And I just stayed there. I was supposed to go to New York City and plant a church. I had it all lined up. That was my plan.
Wow.
And like many people, my 1 year in Vegas turned into 10 and had my babies there. I ended up planting a church called Apex that was back in kind of the Gen X church days. And super fun, but I was also, I was a senior pastor at 24, so that's just ridiculous. And
no one should know.
I even knew it at the time. I knew it was ridiculous, and I had not even I had started questioning secretly if I was even still an evangelical, and is this what I believe, and all this kind of stuff.
Sure.
But I was having so much relative success for my age that a lot of my story is, we didn't call it deconstruction back then, but just trying to figure out, what do I really believe while I'm also creating a career that's dependent on it. And so that, I'm getting way into it, but that led me into actually a season of depression, because I wasn't sure how to manage all that. I started taking improv classes for therapy, and it turned into a job. So that's the shortest version to kind of tell that part of the story. And
I just want to say this, man. Like, I've listened to your podcast before. This is important.
Yeah.
Like, I think when people put on a podcast and they're like, I'm going to seek out whoever, or I'm about to guest, sometimes they don't always understand that the person behind the microphone not only has a story, but that story has affected them in an incredibly deep way. And it's one of the reasons why they're behind the microphone. So even as I sit here and I talk to you, I can visualize Central Christian Church. I know it.
Yeah.
I don't know when the last time you were there, but the idea that you were a pastor, and a successful pastor at 24 in Las Vegas, I feel like that scares my heart a little bit. That's just a lot. I don't care who you are.
Yeah.
That's a lot. Judd Wilhite, who's over at, he's a grown man who is successful and has a great heart, but I still have an anxiety that I feel sometimes for anybody who's in a position of leadership at that point.
Yeah.
Especially on that level, So
well, look,
I'm so glad you were able to come to where you are, man.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And the other thing I would say is I'm sure you deal with this as well, is I have a real passion, like, for LeaderCast to be a place for folks of all faith and no faith. We're all just leaders trying to be better people. And I can even get a little weird about telling my origin story sometimes, because I don't want people to make assumptions about me because I was an evangelical pastor one way or the other. It can be such a triggering. It's almost like saying, I was a White House intern or something, people are gonna immediately go, okay, what's up? What political party were you? And like, let me decide if I like you or not. And so I'm not proud or not proud of my past. It's just, and I know when you say you did the Gospel Project and all that kind of stuff, people can start to make assumptions around what you believe, which I guess is exactly what your video was about with race, right?
100%. There's a line in there. It's a really subtle line where I say, people oftentimes think I'm Muslim, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
And for the people who are in my life who know me, they know that is a subtle but very honest and transparent way of me saying the way I've grown in this world is massive.
Yeah.
The way that I've grown in my faith and what I think about faith and what I think about God, and the way I walk my life is so different than how I felt when I was 17 and went to a summer camp, and my life was altered. And man, I trust me when I tell you, even when I brought up Gospel Project a minute ago, you're completely right. I thought to myself, do I want to mention Gospel Project right now? Because people are going to assume, oh, we have this Jesus-y guy on here, or whatever, because of that's where my story is.
Yeah.
But little do people know, I mean, a lot of people know now because they read my book, is that was just a small piece in a much bigger picture of bringing me to the place that I was able to slay a few dragons.
There you go.
See how we brought that full circle?
Yeah. Folks that listen for a while go like, what's Joe doing? He hasn't even asked the first question yet.
Oh, surprise. Why do we start? I said, this is going to be a surprising episode.
That's right. I love it. I'm here for it. And just, we'll keep going the stream of consciousness because this is at least super interesting to me. And so we just had our big LeaderCast event. I did a keynote, and the 10,000 hours thing, I've been on stage for 10,000 hours and I'm generally pretty confident. But it's been interesting because half of it was preaching and the other half was doing R-rated comedy in Vegas. And I've been doing lots of things on stage. So I'm usually really comfortable on stage. And I decided I thought I took what was a measured risk, and I told the story of Joseph from Genesis in a obviously like a secular context, right? And I set it up.
Sure.
I was afraid I was going to get a ton of grief from religious folks because I set it up saying, this is a Hebrew myth. I'm not saying it happened. I just think it's a story that has shaped millions of people in all three monotheistic religions. So it's worth looking back in our past to see these stories and mine the truth out of them still instead of just dismissing them. And then I told the story because it's just a great story to tell and it's kind of fun. And
Sure.
I got 3 points out of it like a good ex-preacher. And then I expected to get hate mail and critique from particularly from like evangelical Christians for kind of talking about the Bible a little looser than they like. And I got more than I've ever gotten from like atheists and anti-church folks and people that have been abused by the church saying, I went to a secular leadership event. I didn't expect to be triggered by hearing a Bible story. And I was like, man, I'm just saying that to you. I didn't plan on ever actually saying this on the podcast, but like that, I wrote a blog right after that talking about how to handle criticism. And the first point is like, sometimes we all kind of like to be criticized by people, but mainly that remind us of what we don't like about ourselves in our youth. You know what I mean? Like I love to be criticized by people who believed what I believed when I was 19 because I'm like, you'll figure it out. And that, I think that's what I thought was going to happen. But when you're criticized by folks that would more resonate with how you actually believe. I mean, I was called sexist and all sorts of stuff. I'm like, that's not me.
Sure.
So it is, I think I'm saying that to you in this context, and we'll make something useful out of this besides just my confessions.
Go ahead.
I was going to ask you just as you think of that and just think of I think of you as someone you're leveraging your own story to help other people. And you do a lot of that by being honest, and I feel like from the outside looking in, you have a great, authentic, and honest way about you. That's also not that can be a little, I don't know, like blatant or upfront at times, but your authenticity mellows it out, and so I'm just wondering, as you hear me tell that story, how you, as a leader, an influencer, think through like accessing those parts of your past that you might know can actually put up walls.
So let me say this first, man. Like, I need you to hear me when I say this, bro. Like, what you just shared right now, that matters. You know, are we allowed to cuss on your podcast? I can't figure that out.
Yeah, it'll just get a little M rating, which is fun. So go.
Okay, well, all right.
We'll bleep it out if it's one of George Carlin's words.
Most of my life is trying to not cuss. That's 99% of my life.
Yeah.
That's what that is. That's, if you ever wonder what is Tyler thinking, he's thinking, don't say a cuss word.
Well, you be you.
But
Go for it.
I'll keep the M rating away on this because I think this conversation is important. But I need you to hear me, bro, that you talking about even that moment of you speaking of that story, for lack of a better word, the popular word now is to say backlash, whatever backlash you got from that specific thing, from people that you maybe weren't expecting to get it from. I know you were like, we'll figure out how to maybe kind of put this in and make it work. Bro, that's the story. This is the story. That's the part of this. I feel like even of this time with you and I together, that's the part that people are going to take away from this.
Yeah.
Because I don't think, one of the reasons why, I'll say this, I think one of the reasons why a book has become so popular is because most men, it's very, very hard to find books where men are incredibly honest about things. Dude, you find it in Glennon Doyle, like people who were Glennon Doyle. You find it with Jen, with my girlfriend. You find it with Jen Hatmaker. You find it with women do a great job of being like, my life was crappy and here's why it sucked and all of those things. Men like to put out books and they're like, here's how you fix your life. And they rarely want to go, this was hard. This was rough. I learned. And not just a surfacey learn. Like, man, you know, I kind of figured out that life was hard. And so I picked up and just kept going. No, there are stories about individuals who literally had to leave the church and go into improv. The worst possible decision anybody can make in the world about almost anything. If you land yourself as a grown person in improv, something's gone wrong in your life.
Yeah, that's accurate, man.
But I just want to be clear in saying, Joe, that matters. And not only do I think it matters to your listeners, but it matters to me because it tells me that I'm not alone. And God, how I take a little bit of pride now being able to talk about Gospel Project and talk about, I was a pastor at one point, and talk about the wild mistakes that I made, because there were times, Joe, like legitimately, man. I remember I have a place where I talk about my book called The Bench here in Nashville. I remember sitting on the bench with my headphones on, thinking to myself, I'm done. Not that I want to kill myself.
Yeah.
But just, my voice is done. I'm finished. There is no possible way that anybody is going to be able to take who I am based on the things that I've done and use that for any sort of good, any sort of influence. All of that dream that I had as a young kid of being a powerhouse in the world for God or for whatever, that's done. And I'm ruined. And there's no more good in me. And something that the church is incredibly good at is that they're cannibals. Like, they want to eat their dime in a second. And that's some hurt to come out of. That I don't care if that's church hurt. I don't care if that's parental hurt. I don't care if that's orphan hurt. That's a hard place to be able to pull yourself out of. And to sit on this podcast and sit across from you and not know the entirety of your story, but to know enough even just from talking to you, to go, I can tell you've been some places that were hard to come back from that you may never talk about, but you're here.
Yeah.
And I know there are people that are listening right now who were like, I turned this on because I heard Tyler was funny. and they're going, damn it, that's me.
Yeah.
And so that's just a really long version of me saying, I know I'm preaching to the choir. This is why you're a leader, why you have this podcast, and why you're here. But this matters, man. This is the thing.
Choir needs more sermons than you think.
Man,
you know, when you think about that phrase, sometimes preachers got to turn around and preach to the choir. They all think they're good. I do appreciate that. Man, you do a great job. I would say I'm supposed to be funny too. I like to say that I was hanging out with Oprah one time, which is totally true. It was me and 10,000 people, and she was doing a keynote, but she was right there, and she told this great story, and she ended it with, well, I think I've said this in the podcast before, but I'll let you know. She said every single person she's ever interviewed, whether they're a president, Brad Pitt, or just a normal person nobody's heard of because there's some crazy story going on in their life, they always say the same thing no matter who they are after the interview. And she said, they say, how'd I do? And she's like, what I learned is no matter how famous or not famous you are, everyone's walking through life wanting to be seen and heard. And they want to know they did okay. I wanted to say that to you now because you have a very authentic, real way of doing that. I feel seen and heard by you. And one of the things I try to do when I do this podcast is at least hope the guests have a moment where they feel seen and heard. And because people can come on stuff like this, you know this. We're like the B movie equivalent of like a book tour for a lot of people. You know what I mean? Like they can't get on Good Morning America, so they'll do our podcast. And my goal is often, that's fine. I get it. We got to get the word out of the great stuff we're putting in the world. It's not bad, but you can get in that rhythm of not being authentic and not being seen. And so, it's a little meta right now, but what I see in you is that you see people, and thank you for doing that for me. I'll think of it throughout the day. It meant a lot, so thank you.
No, I appreciate it, and I think it's important as we walk through the world, man, to stop and look around and go, who am I kindred spirits with?
Yeah,
you know, like in passing, to stop and go, all right, is there something more here than just words, or does deep connect to deep here?
Yeah.
And does something speak out? And I'm not just calling that out to you because you and I can both visualize what the 7-Eleven right across from Central Christian looks like.
Right. With the slot machines. Yes.
With the slot machines in it.
Video.
But just from us just talking now, man, and me listening even to this podcast, what you do matters, and I'm continually excited for what you're doing in the world. Isn't it crazy to think that when you were 24 in Las Vegas pastoring, there is not a scenario in the world that you could have ever imagined that you'd be sitting in Cincinnati on a microphone on something called Zoom, telling stories for a living.
Yeah.
Like,
well, I couldn't have imagined this 3 years ago because I wasn't running LeaderCast yet. They were a client of mine. So just telling me I would be the CEO of LeaderCast would have blown my mind. I do want to, sadly we're running out of time, but hopefully I'll get your digits and we can hang out in person now. But I want to seriously ask you, because I think it does relate to a lot of what we just talked about. Because I assume your Before You Call the Cops video like blew up during the George Floyd summer, right? Like that was a big part of it. 2020 was such an insane year, obviously. And what I want to ask about, because we've flirted around all these sort of issues of, that was a big deal for me of doing what I came to call like anti-racist work, and Ibram Kendi, reading that book, like stuff that I, like a lot of white folks who have been through some stuff, I thought I was good with that. And it made me realize I wasn't. But it did sort of swing the pendulum way over to just feeling like really crappy about myself and like not knowing how to react. And I would see all these black ladies online saying, don't ask us stuff that you can Google. Because I got it. I understand why that would be frustrating.
Sure.
But then, so now I'm around my actual black friends. Like, I don't want to ask. Like, it was just hard to like figure out how to process through all that stuff. But it does kind of relate to what we've been talking about in terms of like, sometimes our religious heritage can create that tension as well. And I would not have predicted, I should have, because of the way the world goes. Pretty much every single white leader I knew in 2020 was on that journey with me for a few months.
Sure.
We really were.
Sure.
Like, and I was like, this is awesome. Like, this is actually going to change everything.
Sure.
And within a year, it had been so politicized that I got hate mail for just booking black folks for speaking at my event. Yeah. And I think my question for you is like, what have you learned, say, in the last 12, 18 months coming out of all that? Speak directly. There's a ton of folks just like me that listen to this. Like, what have you learned? Where is your hope for race relations, or what's your up-to-date advice or encouragement for folks like me trying to figure this stuff out?
Sure. Okay. So I'm going to say a couple things on here about this. And I wish I would have took notes, because I feel like I want to make some bullet points on things that you said, so I don't leave things out. But first, let me say this. It's something that I talk about all the time as a black person in America. Black people, we are not monolithic. Yeah. And as much as it's really easy, and we, even as black folks, do this to ourselves, where, we make jokes about, this is what black folks do, this, that, or the other. I mean, comics have made tons of money off of being, this is what black folks do, this is what white folks do. But the reality of the issue is we're just not the same. Same way how white people just aren't the same, or anybody just isn't the same. So there is 100% a place for white people to recognize the fact that non-white people should not be responsible to give you an education of things that you should be able to just find out. Yeah. But I think what's sometimes happens with that stigma, especially after you continue to hear that over and over and over again from people, is that white people begin to go, I can no longer ask questions, or these are things that I should know that I don't, or I don't feel like I necessarily want to go, what exactly does that mean? Yeah. But because we are not monolithic, I think it's very important to understand that there are individuals who have taken on the mantle and the responsibility to go, I'm going to make myself accessible to you because I want to grow this in a way, and I have the bandwidth to be able to do that. Yeah. Now, know that doesn't mean that there's every black person in America is walking around for that. Yeah. But there are individuals that you work with, that you've grown up with, that you may have never imagined, that would be more than willing to sit down with you over a cup of coffee and go, let's talk about everything you want to know. I have that bandwidth, and I have the vision of how we move forward, because I'm one of those people that are positioned to be able to do that work. I think that's really important for people to know, for white people to hear and understand that because we are not monolithic, that means that we are not necessarily all the same in this statement of it's just your job. Is there a complete truth in the fact that it's your job to learn about things? 100%. Yeah. We as black people didn't have the opportunity not to, because all of our education has been white history, right, or white, or we are living the white experience. But I just think it's important for your listener to hear that. Yeah. As you walk through the world, the same way how I'm inviting you to look for those kindred people in your life, look for those people who may have the bandwidth open to be able to give to you in a way that you may not deserve. Okay, so there's that. Before we call the cops came out, a lot of people think that it came out in 2020 and got popular. It actually came out in 2018 and went viral the first time, right? And went hugely viral. 60 million people saw it in 2018. and people were talking about it. It was a huge deal. And then because I had personal issues in my life that some people would consider failures, and at that time I would have as well. I disappeared from the internet. Mm-hmm. And where genuinely, if you Googled, is Tyler Merritt, the first thing that would pop up is dead, because I deleted all of my social media. Everything was gone because I was hiding because of shame.
Yeah.
But in 2018, that's when it popped off. 2020, when I wasn't even on social media anymore, Tyler Merritt, Before You Call the Cops, became trending on Instagram. I wasn't even on the internet, bro, but it was trending because Lionel Richie, Sarah Bareilles, all these people would begin sharing my video, and I was kind of forced to come back into the world. I say forced, but my friend Joy Reid kind of pushed me back into the world. People at that point were like, Tyler, what you're saying in this moment because of George Floyd is fantastic. And I was going, guys, I said this 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Because we were Black before George Floyd.
Yeah.
And we're going to be Black after George Floyd.
Yeah.
And my parents were Black before I was born. And though in 2020, you are now having a renaissance of the soul, and you are having a moment of going, how do I be an anti-racist? And you were going, all things are glorious. Black people were going, this is not new.
Yeah.
We have already been here. We've already seen people push through this revolution and march and think that all change was going to come. We know that we are in a moment right now. So in this moment, what are we going to do? One of the things that we're going to do is we're going to scream from the rooftops how much our lives matter. That's what we're going to take advantage of in this moment, because once this moment passes, I don't care what you do politically or who you are or what you're thinking about this, whatever. What we need you to remember is when all this passes, our lives are still important. When you no longer have to wake up and have to dealing with online pictures of Black people dying, we still walk out of the front door as Black people. And so we're going to need you to remember that our lives matter. When you have the privilege to get over it, we will just be stepping back into a scenario we've always been in. So let me give you the hope here.
Yeah.
What I took from that time period is, and who knows, if you have me back, maybe we'll do another one of these, because I definitely feel like the storyline piece of me is realizing that outside of wanting to be a rapper and an actor and a teacher and a preacher and a band and a front man of a band, for me it's always been about the story. It's always been about the story. So when I was at Bethany Bible College, if somebody would said to me, hey, Tyler, do you think you'll ever write a book? I would have said, that's insane. But once I did, it occurred to me that my life has always been about telling stories. With Before You Call the Cop, it's just a 3-minute story.
Yeah.
And our stories connect us. Our truths bring us together. Our ability to be able to have empathy for each other because of those stories are the things that cause proximity to one another. Those are the things that stretch beyond you as a white man in your 50s and me as a Black man almost there, able to look across from each other without saying the words, Joe, and knowing that there's something deeper that connects us.
Yeah.
But unless we take that time and take the energy to lean into that proximity, to find ourselves going, okay, I live in an area where it's only white people. There are only white people here. Sure, this book is great, but if my wife can find a way to get our whole family to Disneyland on our family vacation, she can also probably find a way to take us to an environment where our kids can learn something real and honest about people that don't look like them.
Yeah.
When we're able to lean into that, bro, when we're able to lean into that, these moments of 2020 that were so fickle turn into lifelong lessons. They turn into lifelong journeys. They turn into the things that actually change us and actually connect us. So there's hope there because there's time to do that.
Thank you. That's awesome, man. And unfortunately, we are out of time almost. But I would love to have you back on this or some other way to continue to be a voice in our community. Would mean the world to me. I really appreciate. I feel a connection with you as well, and I just really want to keep fostering that.
Yeah, man.
Thank you so much for your honesty and your time. And you were right; this wasn't a normal one. But I think people are going to hear things. What happened is we both got to tell some of our story, right? And that is exactly what connects people. I was having lunch with a guy that I've known forever, and I said something like, I used the word story to mean like the meaning of life naturally. And
Sure.
he's like, you've been on that story thing for 30 years. He's like, you talk about story in a way that nobody else does. I was like, it's all there is. Like, we are story creatures, we're story people. And when our stories intersect, it's an invitation to one another to, in smaller, big ways, continue to let our stories merge. Right. So, thank you for doing that today with us. You didn't do this just for your health. You do have stuff out there that people can purchase and buy and learn more about you. I know you have a new book out. It's on order for me, and my best friend in Vegas was reading it when I was with her last week. But
You're talking about your wife, Debbie.
I was talking about
your wife. Debbie.
I was talking about Nancy, who's my best friend Chris's wife.
Well, shout out to Debbie, who I know is a fan of my girlfriend Jen.
She is.
So what's up, Debbie?
She loves Jen.
And props to Nancy. If you live in Las Vegas, go Golden Knights.
Go Knights, go.
So, yeah, man. I have a book. It's been out for a while now, but it's recently out in paperback. It's called I Take My Coffee Black: Reflections on Tupac, Musical Theater, Faith, and Being Black in America. And man, it's funny, but it's deep. I talk a lot about Las Vegas, Northern California, Santa Cruz, where I live, Nashville, New York City, a lot of different areas. It's a surprisingly emotional book. I didn't want to just write a book about Black history, but I wanted to write a book about proximity. So it's very difficult to close the cover of that book and not feel like we are wildly connected.
Yeah.
And also the audiobook it really is a good time, man. Jimmy Kimmel's on it. My parents are on it. My best friend, James Iglehart, who's a Tony Award winning actor, is on it. They just kind of let me have my way with it. So it's like an audiobook you've never heard before. It's a mixture between a radio show, a podcast, an audiobook, and just really great storytelling. It will become your favorite audiobook you've ever listened to. I also have a kid's book out there called A Door Made for Me, that is an Audie Award winner, which is kind of the Grammys for the audiobook world. So yeah, man. And people can find me on Facebook on the Tyler Merritt Project, or Instagram, Tyler Merritt Project, just, all the places. And I would love to connect with your listeners, man, because I know for a lot of people, this may be their first time getting to hear from me.
Love it, man. You definitely will. You're in now. Just don't leave. You're in the LeaderCast community, so we'll keep hanging out. Thank you so much. Let me go a little overtime with you. I really appreciate it.
No problem, man. No problem. Till next time.
All right, bud. We'll talk to you later.